All right, so to kick off this final episode, the first thing we want to talk about is what are emotions and why should I bother feeling them? So, firstly, emotions we can think of as just energy in motion, energy that's moving through the body. There's nothing good or bad about them, they're just energy, okay? Now, emotion is different to feeling. So feeling is the actual sensation that we feel in our body, i.e., a rumbling in our belly or a heat in our chest or our neck. And then the emotion is what we label that as, because we could both have the same feeling in our body, but one I might have labeled as anger and the other person might label as excitement, for instance. So with emotions, we can, as we grow up, depending on our environment, learn that certain ones are really good and okay. So, joy and happiness could be, considered great. However, we could also learn from our caregivers and our environment early on that certain emotions are not welcome and they're not okay. So for instance, anger, maybe you've been told that you're not allowed to express, rage or really shout, or if you did, you were punished for it. Another one could be sadness, particularly as guys, we learn to suppress our sadness and tears. A lot of clients tell me they haven't cried for 20 years maybe, So most people think that, with these emotions that, they're there and we don't really need to feel them. There's no purpose for them. So they can just push them away and then they can get back to, being productive and doing other things. The thing is, though, that not feeling our emotions can have some pretty negative side effects. Now, what I want to explain is, imagine when you're born, we have a full box of crayons available. Those markers that you used to color in with as a kid? Maybe you have a pack of like 50 crayons or 50 markers, red and yellow and blue and green and purple and orange, and you used to draw the lovely picture with them. Now, every emotion has a corresponding color or a corresponding breathing rhythm in our body. So if we learn that certain parts of our body and our nervous system aren't welcome, such as the expression of anger moving through that body is not good and not welcome, our body will learn to shut it down. So it will learn to exclude certain colors from the pack. So maybe if we shut down anger, then red isn't available. If we shut down sadness, then there's no more blue. Now with that, there's benefits because then we don't have to feel these things, okay? And we don't get punished for showing them. But on the flip side, it actually doesn't mean that we're not having an emotion, we're just not expressing it. So it's still somewhat stored in the body. Now, let me explain that a bit clearer. Well, let's say with something like anger, okay? When someone naturally crosses a line and crosses a boundary for me, there is the creation of an anger feeling in my body. However, if I have numbed myself to anger and disassociated from my anger to the point where I don't even consciously recognize it's happening anymore, then there will be a shutting down of that experience. And maybe I don't even realize it's there. I just smile and say, yeah, it's fine, no problem, just walk all over me. Okay? That does not mean that there's not a reaction happening in the body though. And that leads to what I call the rage volcano. So that's where we've built up all this anger in our body that we're not even connected to and we don't even know is there. But in order to hold down the anger so we can maintain this image of being such a good and such a nice person, then it's taking a lot of our battery every single day. So imagine waking up every morning. If you've ever had like one of those iPhones that the battery gets really crap after a while, and you charge your phone in the morning and then it's 100%, and then at lunchtime it's already 20%, and you got that low power mode thing coming up, and you're like, why is my battery already dying? I barely even used it. And it's because in this case, the body is having to use so much energy to hold down all this unprocessed anger. Like imagine every time someone crossed the line with you, it created one reaction that you didn't process. And now over time, there's maybe 200 or 300, anger responses stored in your body that have not been let out. And every time someone crosses the line, that whole volcano is getting, activated. And again, you've got to push it down. Another example of this could be sadness. If you've suppressed your tears and not cried for many years, that doesn't mean that you don't feel sadness or grief. It's just that you've not learned to express it, and your body has learned it's better for your survival to shut that shit down and not talk about it and man up, because that was better for your survival. Like your body literally in a cost benefit analysis puts your social standing and status as, in this case, a man, higher than expression of emotion. It's kind of like a short-term fix because you get to maintain face when you're in a sad situation, okay, and look strong and big, but over time it chips away. And more importantly, it disconnects you from also the positive emotions. So if we, suppress, the so-called negative or bad emotions, then we can't selectively just numb them. We have to also numb the stuff on the other side of the spectrum, the positive emotions. So for instance, if I've suppressed grief and I don't allow myself to really feel the pain of loss and grieving, then how can I ever truly experience love? Because they're both sides of the same coin. So in avoidance of grief, I numb myself to love, and I end up living this kind of straight line of life, just this flat, numb experience, which is something that myself and Renee talked about in, I think it's episode 16, called Why Do I Feel So Flat? Now, we can also use things like, substances and external things to repress these emotions and push them down and pretend that they're not there and not have to think about them and, just get back to work. It's more important. Why should I bother feeling my emotions? No time for that. However, that's like a consistent long-term or short-term strategy or short-term solution for a long-term pain, where it's kind of like, imagine you've been going to, an ATM with a credit card and withdrawing a couple of €100 every time and not really looking at the balance or acknowledging that, this is creating quite some debt. It keeps giving me money, so I'm just going to keep, taking money and avoiding the problem. But what you don't realize is that there's a large debt been built up on the other side that at some point needs to be serviced. Otherwise, it's going to come crashing down and the Italian loan sharks will be knocking on your door very soon, i.e. in the form of an emotional collapse or burnout in this case. So how our past experiences and our past emotions can be affecting our nervous system today is something I really want to talk about. Because those old emotions and stuff that you thought just, you didn't feel and then they went away. And when my grandparents passed away, I didn't feel anything and it was fine. And now I'm great, so I don't need to think about that anymore. But they can still be affecting you in the present day if you haven't processed them before. And I'm going to explain how. Now, in episode 1 of this series called Understanding Your Nervous System, we discussed the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic is the activation, stress response, go, 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 fight or flight. But what we didn't talk about in that episode, which is like a new spoiler that we're going to spill in this one, is the parasympathetic actually has two sides to it. One is deep rest, and that's when it's like we're chilled out and we're connecting and everything's nice and we're meditating and it feels good. But then there's another side of it called shutdown or freeze, where we collapse basically and we go into this full freeze state. That typically happens when someone has pushed themselves too far, too hard for too long, and they go into this collapse or shutdown state. Now, ideally, we want to be, especially for business and high performance, in what I'd like to call flow. Flow state is basically where we've got high parasympathetic with this more, connected, engaged. We're fully in our bodies, but we're also activated in sympathetic. If you think about a high performance athlete, performing at the highest level, they're not just, in full tilt with their physical abilities, activated, but they're also very focused. And this flow state, that's where it comes from. Now, what we're going to talk about here is the opposite of flow state, which is the shutdown. And this is for me, the example to end all examples, that if this really lands for you today and you understand this process of how our past experiences can be influencing us today, it will really change everything for you. So I'm going to tell you a story about a deer and a lion. Now, imagine this. Imagine you have in nature, somewhere in the savannas, somewhere, you've got a deer that's eating grass and relaxing. It's in what we call rest and digest. And we're going to go through a cycle with this. So imagine you've got this clock face, so imagine a clock in front of you. And at 12 o'clock on the clock face, you've got this deer and he's in rest and digest and he's eating grass up the top of the clock. Now, if you go to 3 o'clock on the clock face, you will have a picture of a lion. So imagine a lion coming out of a bush and chasing the deer. Now, without thinking, the deer moves from this resting state and digesting into what we call fight or flight. So produces adrenaline, cortisol, bam, 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 heart rate goes up, and it mobilizes all this energy to run away, to get out of there. Okay? So let's say it mobilizes 50 kilometers worth of energy to escape from this challenging situation. Now what happens is it runs, and after a certain while, the lion jumps on it and catches it, okay? Now imagine down on our clock face at 6 o'clock. down the bottom, okay? This is where the deer moves into what we call a freeze state, which is the shutdown state we talked about. And that's basically an overwhelm, checking out, playing dead. And the reason why it has that is, I think, twofold. The first reason is that when the lion thinks the deer is dead, it's less likely to continue trying to kill it, and it will put it down, which gives the deer a better chance of surviving and escaping. The second reason is that if the lion decided to eat the deer would actually feel very little to no pain because it's basically completely numbed out from its body. So it's kind of like this twofold, response in the body. One could say it's, some form of God having mercy on the animal kingdom as, they tend to eat each other. And it means that, the mouse doesn't actually feel much pain when the cat eats it. But one thing to keep in mind is the animals that had this freeze response obviously survived because that's why they passed it on. The ones that didn't have the freeze response probably died and didn't pass on their genes. And that's why much down the track, all animals and even humans, but we'll come to that shortly, have this same mechanism inside of them. So let's imagine the deer is frozen now, it's playing dead, and the lion has jumped on it, okay? And all that energy it had to run away from the lion is now trapped inside its body. Okay, so what does it do? It needs to just stay there stuck. It can't move. The lion puts it down. It thinks it's dead, so it goes off to get its kids for dinner. Okay, now after maybe 20 seconds, all of a sudden, the deer snaps out of it. And it jumps up and it runs. Okay, so imagine that's at 9 o'clock on our clock face. Okay, so the lion is gone off, okay, and the deer is able to run away and escape to safety. Okay, because it had this playing dead and now it's come out of that and run. So let's say it runs another 15 kilometers to get to safety. So in the beginning it ran 15 kilometers and then it got jumped on by the lion. Now it runs away another 15. So it gets back to safety and it realizes, okay, now I'm safe. I'm in a safe environment. I'm all good. So what does it do now with the extra 20 kilometers that are stuck in its system without it, have been able to discharge that before? Well, it needs to move that energy out of the body. So without thinking, as a way to complete this cycle, the deer will naturally now start to shake. And it will move energy and discharge the energy out of its body, that extra 20 kilometers. So it moves all the energy out. And then finally, it can return to this rest and digest state up at the top at 12 o'clock on our clock face. And it closes the loop. This is what we call a stress cycle or a trauma cycle. And what happens then is the deer is not traumatized. It remembers maybe that this event happened and it maybe doesn't go back to eat in that field again. But if it hears a branch snap behind it, it's not going to go into a PTSD trauma state and freeze and check out again. So that's how the deer moves through that state. And that's something that's present in many animals, because they've all got this, to some degree, mechanism, this freeze response as a way of protecting itself. Now, how does that differ from humans? So we're humans. We obviously want to learn, how is this relevant for us? Now, we have similar parts of the brain as the deer and to some degree the lion, but specifically the deer's freeze response and the fight or flight we have also in our system, okay? Let's imagine a second scenario, this time with a human. So imagine you've got, there's me, I'm sitting at home and I'm watching Netflix. And all of a sudden, okay, I'm in this rest and digest state, but all of a sudden I hear this big bang outside my door. Boom, okay? Without thinking, my body starts to produce adrenaline, fight or flight, boom, 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 boom. Okay, I'm ready to run away or get into a fight to protect myself. Next thing I know, a man comes through the door with a big shotgun and points at my face and says, "Give me all your money." So now my body, recognizing that, actually the best survival thing I can do is to freeze, it shuts me down and I can't move, I'm frozen. And so I go, "Oh, okay, money's on the table." He takes my wallet, leaves. Now, just like the deer, I come out of the freeze state and I start to come down. I'm like, "Wow, that was crazy. What the hell was that? How did that happen?" And, I'm kind of a bit delirious afterwards. Now, once I get to safety, maybe 2 days later, I'm sitting on my sofa, relaxing, okay? And my body finally recognizes the threat is gone. So what does it do? It starts to try and process and let go of all that energy that got stuck. Now, how that feels in my body is energy rising up and like quite a lot of energy, and it doesn't feel very good. And I start to question it. Now, the difference between me and the deer is that the deer does not have a prefrontal cortex. It doesn't judge its experience. It doesn't say, oh my God, this is so weird. What would people think if I have emotions or something? It just does what it needs to do, and it moves the energy and goes back to eating grass. Whereas humans, we have what's called a prefrontal cortex that's much more developed. So we judge our experience. That's what makes us different. We go, oh my God, this is weird. I don't like it. Am I broken? Am I going to die? And we basically want to avoid it. So what do? We get on our social media, we smoke, we drink, we watch porn, we do anything we can to avoid feeling that. And the avoidance of feeling that is what prevents it from moving up and out of our bodies and processing fully those old stored emotions, that full experience, and it stays basically then stuck or stored in our body, and the cycle is never truly completed. So that's not really ideal, and that wouldn't be a good strategy for me if a man did walk into my house with a shotgun. However, the good news is there's not many guys with shotguns walking around, robbing us in our houses. So that's good, because there's not many situations in our adult life day to day that would overwhelm us to that degree that we would have such a traumatic response that we would then repress. However, a few years ago, i.e. many years ago, when we didn't have as developed a window of tolerance and capacity, things were much more likely to overwhelm us and could potentially lead to death. So when I'm 5 years old and my mum forgets me at the supermarket, okay, that could actually lead to me dying in my mind, to that 5-year-old, because I don't have the resources to protect myself. I lose my safety, and I don't know where to go, and I don't have food now, and, all those things. However, if I'm 35 and my mum leaves me at the supermarket, I get an Uber. It's not a big deal, because I've got the tools and the resources and the embodied confidence in me later in life to deal with challenges. But that was not the case always when I was younger, and I was much more reliant on my caregivers. Now, let's think of this example. I'm 5 years old, I'm at home, I'm in rest and digest, just like the deer. This time I'm playing with maybe my toys, in my living room. It's a safe environment. Next thing, I accidentally knock an expensive vase off the table and it smashes on the floor. Now my mom is very angry. She's screaming at me, how could you do that, you brat? You always break things, okay? And now I'm in fight or flight state because I recognize this is a big threat. Next thing, my mom says, that's it, I'm sick of you, I'm leaving. And she walks out and slams the door. Now, to the 5-year-old me, standing there, that is my one source of love and safety and connection and security. And she has just said she's leaving. Now, that could mean she never comes back. And to me, who doesn't have the ability to, reason and rationalize, and also has no concept of, how to create safety for myself, then that probably could lead to a very high likelihood of death. So what do? I am completely overwhelmed, and my body goes into this shutdown, freeze state because I can't cope with it anymore. Now, maybe she comes back later and it works out okay, but if I'm never given a safe space to fully process those emotions, and also my parents maybe suppress my emotions or don't let me express sadness or anger, and they tell me to stop crying or tell me to not screaming or I'll be punished and all these things, then I'm never given the space to truly process those emotions. And so that trauma cycle or the stress cycle is never going all the way back around to 12 o'clock and completing like the deer did, okay? Now, that's all well and good, okay? And I could say, on my therapist's couch 30 years later, yeah, I had a great childhood. My mom was great. Yeah, she wasn't perfect, but no one is. And, that time with the vase broke, she came back after 10 minutes and, life was great. I had a great childhood. However, the same day I could go home and have a fight with my girlfriend, okay? And she could say, that's it. I need some space. I got to get out. I got to leave for a few minutes, okay? And her leaving creates the same trigger, the same feelings of abandonment in my nervous system as my mom leaving age 5. So guess what? I react like a 5-year-old, okay? My body truly believes in that moment that I'm 5 years old and I'm reliving that traumatic experience, okay? And once again, it's brought up. And if I don't actually go through and fully complete that and recognize in my system that I'm now safe, then I'm going to be destined to repeat that situation again and again. And that is why you get people who maybe have all their shit together in business and they look good and they got everything going right? And then they get into a relationship and guess what? They turn into a child. Why? Because it is reactivating all of their deepest core wounds around love, around validation, connection, safety, all those things, the times that their nervous system got overwhelmed and they didn't have the tools to deal with it, to close that loop. They're now getting reactivated. And those old unprocessed emotions and experiences that are living in the system, it's kind of like you got your iPhone and you got all those tabs open in the background and you haven't looked at them in a long time. Here you go, you got loads of different apps, okay? But if you don't go in and consciously close them off one by one, okay, then they're going to be living there, draining your battery every day and forcing you to act in ways that aren't actually the real you, but a past, earlier version of you. So it's kind of like, you could look at someone driving by in their fancy Tesla and say, wow, such a nice car, going so fast, how great. But if you actually looked behind the tinted windows, you'd see that they're tied up in the passenger's seat and there's like someone else driving the car, a robot driving the car. Certainly they're not in control, even though it looks like they are. And that's how it is. If you've got these incomplete loops or tabs open in your system, these old unprocessed emotions that you've never had the chance to go back and consciously close in a safe space with the right support, and that's going to mean that you're going to be basically have your life driven by these old incomplete reflexes. And what's more, it's almost like they're going to color and tint the way you see the world. It's almost like you've been wearing, sunglasses or black glasses and you can't even see the true full color that life has to offer because your perception has been distorted by all these old experiences that you're not even aware of because it's just, the underlying fabric of your reality. So what the hell do we do about this? You might ask me next. Well, it's a great question, and it was definitely a question that drove me for many years, especially as I started to learn more about this work. So typically people go down the route of doing, therapy or coaching. These are things that are recognized as universally being really good, to talk about these things, to understand, oh, that happened, wow, that was maybe a big deal, and to cognitively recognize that these happened. But talking about something is not closing the loop because we're not actually getting back into the low brain, which is where all these experiences are stored. The low brain is like the lizard brain, which has no concept of time. That's the freeze state, that's the autonomic nervous system, these really old parts of the brain and body. So other people go down the route of doing something more like psychedelics, more experimental route, and that can tap into it because we're moving into altered state. But it's very random to take psychedelics because there's no real way of working on specific topics or issues. It kind of just brings up stuff and maybe your subconscious has some imagery and there's some colors and emotion, but it's very hard to integrate. And also people, can think, oh, well, was that the drugs talking or was it, actually me? So it's hard to really know the difference. So, the mind-based approaches don't really get down into the, the true core of bringing up these old incomplete reflexes in the body to get rid of them. And the psychedelics are more random and harder to integrate. And also you can't go and do psychedelics every other week because they're kind of illegal in most places. So what worked really well for me is, you guessed it, connected breathwork. Now what's happening in a breathwork session is we're through breath switching off the prefrontal cortex, which is the judging mind, the same part that says, I don't like this emotion, it's bad, make it go away, the part that the deer doesn't have. So we're basically dropping into deer mode in ourself, okay, or into like this more malleable state where we can resurface these old loops or apps in our body. Now, what's happening then is, okay, we're able to breathe with them. And as we drop back into these earlier experiences like, oh my God, I'm 5 years old, my mom left, I'm going to die, I'm so scared, okay? At the same time, I can have a facilitator with me guiding me through that experience, saying, find your breath, you're in a safe space, make a sound. And all these things that I'm doing are now reminding my body, wait, hang on a sec, I'm not 5 years old anymore, I'm 35 now. This is fine, I'm in a safe space, this is great. So I'm kind of pendulating or moving between the two. I'm going, oh my God, I'm 5 years old, I'm gonna die. I'm 35, I'm in a safe space, it's 2024. I'm 5 years old, I'm gonna die. And we kind of move between these two. And what that does is it kind of jars or messes up the signal, okay? And then after that experience, if we have a long relaxation, which is what we do in the connected breathwork, can be 20, 25, 30 minutes, that's where the body basically gets to integrate that and recognize, this happened when you were 5, and it puts a stamp on it. It moves it up from this low brain with no concept of time into the limbic brain. And now it registers it as this happened in 1992. So now when my girlfriend says I'm leaving, I'm sad, doesn't feel good, but I'm not acting like a 5-year-old. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm able to respond to the stimulus with the appropriate response. And I'm now meeting life truly present in the moment instead of being tied up in the passenger seat and been driven by my reactive responses. And, as a result, my addictions and my negative behaviors that are, I'm no longer been dictated by my subconscious incomplete reflexes of my body. I'm able to live fully, presently, and true to myself in every moment. And that, my friend, is absolutely priceless. So if all this sounds interesting, then more than happy to introduce you to this world a bit deeper and to go in and talk a bit more about what could be some of these loops hiding in the background that maybe you didn't even realize were there. And more importantly, how to drop into the body and start to bring up and complete and move some of these stored reflexes and responses and emotions that have been held for maybe most of your life without realizing. That could be coloring the lens through which you see the world. And when you let go of them, let me tell you, it is a whole other experience of life, because now the gloves are off. The opportunity to go for what we really want, completely uninhibited by the ghosts and the memories and emotions of our past. That is absolutely an experience and a life worth having and living. So if you have enjoyed this topic and you are intrigued after this 3-part series and you want to go deeper, well, you are definitely in the right place. You can listen to a few more of the episodes. We've got interviews with different other founders and entrepreneurs that have gone through these similar journeys and experienced these things in their body for themselves. But as with any other, body-based modality, the best thing to do is to get in there and try it. So there's a few different ways we can do that. Get in touch with us via our Instagram or LinkedIn at ReallyAlign. You can go to our website, ReallyAlign.com, and join our mailing list. You can get in there and join our wait list for sessions. And the way we work is we either work on a long-term basis, one-on-one with people. It's called the Align Founder Program. Or we also do deep dive retreats, which is a chance to get out of your day-to-day life and, really have a completely new experience, where we get a chance to really, in a week, resurface a lot of these old reflexes and move these old emotions. Generally leading to an experience of returning to life with a completely new lens. So they're all available. We also do company workshops and stuff, which are cool. But at the core of it all, it's all about returning us back to that, true self, that version of us that was inhibited by all these old incomplete loops, and letting them go so we can go forth and live the life that we were truly meant to live and do all the things that we would love to really do. So that's what I'm all about. I hope you enjoyed this series, and look forward to seeing you in many more episodes very soon. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.